latest major protest against plans to house hundreds of asylum seekers at a military base.
Something is happening outside Britain's military facilities right now. Something nobody saw coming. A move announced behind closed doors. A decision pushed through without warning. And within minutes, crowds began to form, faces covered, voices raised, tension climbing with every passing second. What unfolded next has left the entire nation buzzing with one question. How did it reach this point so far? Because tonight, the situation outside several army sites has spiralled far beyond anything the government tried to contain. Panic didn't erupt slowly. It didn't build over days. It slammed into the public like a shockwave the moment word leaked out about the controversial move involving several army facilities. At first, nobody believed the rumour. The idea seemed too reckless, too sudden, too politically explosive. But then, not hours later, not even minutes, crowds started gathering outside the gates. Some wore masks, some carried phones high in the air, and others stood stiff and silent, staring at the heavy steel barriers as if waiting for them to crack open. The air around those bases felt different, thick, electric, unsteady. People weren't shouting at first. They were whispering, questioning, asking why a decision like this was pushed through without a single public briefing. The uncertainty alone was enough to spark the first wave of frustration. And frustration, once it mixes with fear, never stays quiet for long. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. More people arrived, neighbours, passers-by, concerned residents, drawn not by official statements, but by the growing sense that something was happening the government wasn't ready to explain. And then the shouting began. One voice at first, then two, then dozens. It spread through the crowd like fire catching on dry grass, building into a raw, rising chant that bounced off the military walls and echoed across the streets. Security teams scrambled to hold the perimeter. Their faces were tight, their movements sharp, but even they couldn't hide the uneased tension pressing down on the scene. They weren't prepared for this kind of reaction, not this fast, not this intense. Every time the crowd swelled, barriers were reinforced. Every time more masked figures stepped forward, radios crackled with urgent voices demanding updates. People wanted answers, but none were coming. That silence, more than anything, poured fuel onto the growing unrest. Phones kept recording. Live streams grew by the second. Comment sections exploded with theories, outrage, confusion, fear. And as each new rumour spread online, the crowd outside the gates grew louder, angrier, more determined. It wasn't just about the controversial decision anymore. It had become something deeper, something raw that had been simmering across the country for months. A feeling that people were being cut out of decisions affecting their communities. A feeling that things were being done to them, not for them. And now, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cold night air, that frustration had found a focal point at the gates of the army facilities. Tension kept tightening second by second. The crowd pushed forward, security pushed back. Every movement, every shout, every raised hand made the situation more volatile. It felt like one wrong word, one wrong step could send everything spiralling into complete chaos. And that's when the breaking point finally hit. The moment the crowd hit that breaking point, the energy outside the army facilities shifted in an instant. It was no longer a gathering. It became a surge, a wave of anger, confusion, and adrenaline rolling forward as people pushed closer to the gates, demanding clarity, demanding answers, demanding someone, anyone, step out and explain what had really been decided behind those closed doors. You could feel the tension vibrating in the air, the kind of pressure that makes every breath feel heavier. Security forces tightened their formation, shields came up, radios buzzed non-stop. And yet, in the eyes of the officers holding that line, there was something unmistakable uncertainty. Because nobody, not even the people standing at the gates, knew how fast this was escalating or how far it was about to go. This wasn't a planned demonstration. It wasn't organised. It was raw emotion exploding after days, weeks, months of silence from people in power. The crowd kept swelling. It wrapped around streets alleyways, bus stops, stretching far beyond the cameras, trying to capture the moment. Some stood peacefully, some shouted in frustration, and some simply watched, waiting, listening, trying to read the mood like a storm cloud that could break open at any second. The rumour mill online spun faster than any official source could counter. Every new post, every new voice note, every shaky live stream added more fuel to an already burning fire. People wanted to know why this decision was made, why it was sudden, why it was secretive, why it felt like the public was being bypassed again. And the more silence the authorities maintained, the more the crowd interpreted that silence as confirmation that something wasn't right. The unknown is always louder than the truth, and tonight it was the screaming. Then came the moment that shifted the entire standoff. A loud metallic clang burst through the noise. Someone had slapped their hand or an object against the steel gates, and the sound boomed like a warning shot, and the crowd flinched. Security flinched. For a split second, everything froze. That single moment stretched on, long and suffocating, as everyone waited to see what would follow. And when voices burst out again, louder, sharper, angrier, the standoff escalated. Some members of the crowd stepped forward, their masks pulled tight, their eyes locked onto the gates as if daring them to open. Others shouted over the barriers, their voices carrying the weight of fear and frustration that had been building for far too long. People recorded every second, narrating what they thought was happening, what they believed, what they feared. And their followers reacted instantly, comments pouring in, messages spreading, more and more people rushing toward the growing tension. Car headlights pulled along the roads as more vehicles arrived. The glow from phone screens lit up the faces in the crowd, and those faces, tense, determined, agitated, told a story far more powerful than any headline. These weren't people looking for chaos. These were people demanding transparency, demanding dignity, demanding that decisions affecting their communities not be made in the shadows. Inside the facility, lights flicked on in windows. Shadows moved behind curtains. Officers paced along the perimeter with hurried steps, speaking in quick, urgent tones. Whatever had been planned for that night was no longer happening. The situation had taken on a life of its own. Driven not by policy, but by emotion. The longer no one addressed the crowd, the deeper the distrust grew. People began directing their frustration at anyone in uniform, at the cold steel barriers, at the empty watchtower windows. The silence became the enemy. Every unanswered question became proof of something hidden. And as the crowd pressed forward again, louder and more unified than before, one thing was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't going to fade away. It wasn't going to die down. It was building into something bigger, something that could reshape the entire narrative far beyond the walls of any army facility. Because tonight wasn't just about a controversial move. Tonight was about the moment a community realised it wouldn't stand quietly on the sidelines anymore. As the night dragged on, the pressure outside the army facilities hardened into something heavier, something colder. The noise no longer rose and fell. It settled into a constant grinding tension that wrapped around the entire area like a tightening rope. People could feel it in their chest, in their steps, in the way every eye shifted from the gates to the officers and back again. It was as if the whole street was holding its breath, waiting for the moment everything would tip over the edge. And then the lights inside the facility suddenly changed. Floodlights snapped on, bright and blinding, stretching across the crowd and turning every shadow into a sharp silhouette. The reaction was immediate, but people shielded their faces, stepped back, raised their phones higher. It felt like a signal, though nobody knew what it meant. Was it preparation, a warning, a message? No one said a word from inside, yet the move spoke louder than anything the government had said all day. A ripple moved through the crowd. You could hear it. A low wave of voices asking the same questions again and again. Why now? What are they doing? What are they hiding? Every unanswered question sharpened the frustration. People didn't want rumours anymore. They wanted truth, and the refusal to give it only deepened the anger burning just beneath the surface. Suddenly, a line of reinforcement vehicles rolled up the road. Engines humming, tyres grinding against the pavement, the flashing lights reflected off windows, off cars, off the helmets of the officers who stepped forward. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't violent. But it was clear the authorities were preparing for something, and the crowd felt it instantly. Some stepped back, unsure, others stepped forward, defiant. And in the middle stood those who just watched, torn between fear and the simple desire to understand why this moment had spiraled so dramatically. The arrival of reinforcements didn't calm the situation, it amplified it, because now both sides had something to prove. Inside the facility, movement intensified. Dark figures moved across the courtyard. Doors opened and shut, vehicles repositioned. It was the type of activity that only makes people think something major is happening. And the crowd reacted exactly as expected. Phones out, live streams on, captions screaming for answers. Social media was exploding with theories, some wild, some calm, all spreading faster than any official voice could respond. The volume outside climbed again, not chaotic shouting, layered voices overlapping, blending into a storm of raw emotion. People were tired of being ignored, tired of decisions being made without explanation, tired of feeling like observers in their own communities. That emotion pulsed through the crowd like electricity, connecting strangers, fueling suspicions, hardening resolve. Then a sudden push from the centre of the crowd created a ripple that flowed straight toward the gates. It wasn't planned, it wasn't coordinated, it was instinct. People moving, responding to tension like animals sensing danger. Security immediately braced, shields lifting as they pressed back to hold the line. For a moment, the clash felt inevitable, a spark against a wire, but somehow the two sides stopped just short of collision. A wave of shouting broke out, yet not from anger this time, but from fear. People didn't want this to turn violent. They wanted answers, not confrontation. And yet the situation was spiraling so fast that even the calmest voices were being drowned out by the noise of uncertainty. A woman near the front, her face half covered, shouted for information. A man beside her demanded transparency. Others chimed in, turning their frustration into a unified call. The crowd wasn't fractured anymore. It was focused. There was a shared goal, a shared outrage, a shared fear of what silence could mean. Back inside the facility, a new movement caught everyone's attention. A group of officials, silhouettes at first, stepped toward the main entrance. The crowd surged forward again, not in aggression, but anticipation. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for all night. Someone was finally coming to say something, or at least that's what it looked like. But then the doors closed again. No announcement, no explanation, no clarity. And just like that, the tension didn't rise, it detonated. Because nothing enrages a crowd faster than hope being pulled away at the last second.